Introduction. In this unit we will learn in detail the difference between genre fiction and literary fiction. We will consider the factors that differentiate the two but will also look at some points that are exceptions. We will further dive into understanding what makes any fiction popular and/or literary. Debate between genre fiction and literary fiction. In his essay, Easy Writers, in the New Yorker, Arthur Crystal mentioned that for a long time there was not much distinction between literary fiction and genre fiction. One was good for you, one simply tasted good. He further writes, skilled genre writers know that a certain level of artificiality must prevail, lest the reasons we turn to their books evaporate. It's plot we want and plenty of it. Heroes should go up against villains, sympathetic or hateful. Love should, if possible, win out, and a satisfying sense of closure and comeuppance should top off the experience. Basically, a guilty pleasure is a fix in the form of a story, a narrative cocktail that helps us temporarily forget the narratives of our own humdrum lives. And, for not a few readers, there's the additional kick of feeling that they're getting away with something. Modernism, of course, confirmed the idea of the commercial novel as a guilty pleasure by making the literary novel tough sledding. Far from delivering easy pleasures, modernist fiction could be an exercise in aesthetic and psychological subtlety. It was written not for people with time on their hands but for those willing to put in the time to master it. Indeed, fiction in the age of modernism became as much identified with literature as poetry or plays, and its complexities required a new class of expert readers. A secular clergy capable of explaining its mysteries. Serious fiction was serious business, and a reader might tire of it. The four most important, admittedly subjective, criteria that used to differentiate literary and genre fiction are 1. Content, scope and themes. 2. Quality of writing. 3. Treatment, plot-driven vs. character-driven, as you mentioned, and 4. Literary reputation, content, scope and themes. Popular fiction tends to have more interesting, adventurous, sensational, entertaining subject matter, and many popular works are genre fiction such as detective fiction, crime, romance, science fiction, horror, fantasy, westerns etc. The whole novel typically sticks to the theme. That means the content is well defined and predictable, and the scope is relatively narrow. Moreover, authors maintain consistent style and are unlikely to mix elements of multiple genres. On the other hand, literary fiction has a wide range of content. Its themes are drawn from the whole of human life. So its scope is extremely broad and the writers can draw on a variety of styles to suit their purposes. Literary novels typically focus on life experiences, and the best of them are profoundly philosophical about human nature and the meaning of life. Since it is not required to conform to a genre, the audience expectations are less important for such works. Treatment and quality of writing. The best written genre fiction certainly has very high standards, but it tends to have a slightly lower quality of writing. This is because aspiring authors come from various backgrounds and actually improve as their career progresses. Since genre fiction is often more focused on plot than characterization, a slightly lower quality of language does not affect the work by much. Whereas literary fiction is mainly character-driven, and authors tend to be very committed to attaining the highest standards of writing because readers read these books as much for the writing as the story. So literary fiction usually has uniformly high standards of writing compared to popular fiction. Literary reputation. The overall reputation of a work is built over many years. Literary fiction is sometimes popular fiction that has been elevated to literary status over years by the common agreement and approval of writers, literary critics and readers. So the best literary works are read by successive generations of readers and stand the test of time to become highly respected literary classics. By contrast, much of genre fiction is forgotten within a couple of generations. However, the best popular fiction works can become genre classics and get read by many generations of readers who are interested in and devoted to that genre. The finest genre works also illuminate our worldview and are often very close to great literature. What makes a work of fiction great is the approval of many readers in the literary community. Genre fiction is intended more to please the audience, while literary fiction aims to reflect upon the human condition. Please note that somebody can set out to write literary fiction, but end up writing a mediocre book that won't pass the test of literary standards. It is also very possible for a work of genre fiction to fulfill most of the criteria of literary fiction and eventually be celebrated as a great literary work. At least according to science fiction grandmaster Samuel Delany, well known for literary books in popular genres, the distinction is largely one of anticipated audiences. Genre fiction is generally aimed at a larger, more mainstream audience, and may feature simpler plots and language. It also typically follows one or another set of standard genre conventions, which guarantee it a potential audience that enjoys that genre. For example, mystery novels, such as those written by Agatha Christie, usually concern a murder or other serious crime, a range of plausible suspects, and a set of clues that potential allow the reader to anticipate the eventual unmasking of the criminal, which comes at the end of the book. Literary fiction is often considered more prestigious, and is generally expected to draw a smaller, more highly educated audience, often of a higher socioeconomic class. Its use of language may be more complex and its plots more original. It may also be experimental in one sense or another. Salman Rushdie, Michael Chabon and Zadie Smith are three well-known and widely read current authors of literary fiction. Their work may have genre elements, but is not easily characterized or summarized by them. A successful literary work may draw a tiny fraction of the audience of a popular fiction work, yet have an individual influence that is greater and more lasting. Literary works can occasionally be extremely popular, but their popularity is often not easily predictable. It is worth noting that many popular genres are formed in imitation of a standard-setting literary predecessor, for example, epic fantasy in imitation of Tolkien. As genre fiction works become older, their audience profile becomes more like that of literary fiction, in as much as older books, regardless of genre, tend to be read by a smaller, more educated audience. They also become experienced more like literary fiction, as much as their genre characteristics become less familiar as their own time period disappears into the past. In terms of canonization, becoming widely and consistently considered as ranking among the great literary works across the ages, popular works are canonized as often as literary ones. Again, according to Delany, canonization essentially reduces the ability of a work to maintain a productive body of criticism, secondary literature and other cultural artifacts, which combine to keep it alive in the collective cultural imagination. Literary fiction is a genre, like any other, with distinct emphasis, style, emotional impact. Emphasis on the human condition. It's worth noting that before the modern literary movement of the late 19th century, all literature was genre, epics, sagas, romances, histories, etc. Hamlet is a revenge story, just like Euripides' Hecuba, and both are ancestors of Quentin Tarantino's work in cinema. The greatness of Shakespeare elevates his work to the highest echelons of literature, but in their time, They were popular plays aimed at the widest possible audience. It's somewhat rare these days for genre fiction to be elevated to the level of great art, but it's worth pointing out that of all the genres, speculative fiction is the most literary because it developed as a means of social critique, Swift, etc. The best speculative fiction can be intensely literary, for instance, Orwell. Every book Philip K. Dick wrote was about the human condition in a technological society, with an emphasis on the nature of identity in relation to perception, the subjectivity of experience, with empathy as the consistent, central theme. To my mind, this makes him more of a philosopher working in a narrative form. Hunger Games has a deeply mythological basis, suitable for educational purposes, and its primary function is uncompromising social critique appropriate for middle school and up. Michael Chabon was once quoted to the effect that, while he really wanted to be a genre writer, he felt he had to write about adult themes like disappointment to be taken seriously. The general intent of genre writers is to tell a great story, or present exciting ideas, but genre is often elevated to literary status. On character-driven vs. plot-driven, it's true that better work tends to be character, as opposed to plot-driven, but this doesn't mean great work can't have a strong plot. But literary work can also be allegorical. This is the case of No Country for Old Men and The Road and Blood Meridian, which are, not unsurprisingly, also genre novels, crime, sci-fi in the Western. Cormac McCarthy can be said to transcend genre, which may be taken to include the literary genre. When it comes to popular versus literary, what's at issue isn't the existence of this human experience, but the question of what experience is being described and how it is being described. Popular obviously implies that it is being read by a lot of people. Literary, on the other hand, carries the assumption of being the province of the elite few. Reading popular fiction is seen as mindless entertainment, while reading literary fiction is seen as something you can do to improve and educate yourself, in practice. If we look at what books are considered literary, it's almost always books that are assigned by educators or placed in syllabi by academics. So of course it is not surprising that, until recently, the vast majority of literary works were written by white authors. It is of course also not surprising that books become literary for pedagogical rather than artistic reasons. The Great Gatsby, for example, is an excellent book if you are trying to teach high schoolers about symbolism, but in many respects, such as character development, the book falls flat. And it wouldn't be surprising if academia favored books with more complex, professional writing, because that's a skill academia is trying to teach. The dividing line between genre and literary fiction might not be very useful. They may be books and authors who are preferred in terms of learning. But almost any well-written book is capable of doing that. James Joyce once said that all novels are autobiographical. When we read, we are absorbing someone's experiences. That experience may be similar or different from our own. If we think hard enough, we will find that we are always able to learn something from someone else's experience. Literary just means that academia has found the book useful. Popular fiction just means that popular culture has found the book useful. Not to disparage either group, but it's important to decide what you like and find useful, rather than relying solely on the judgment of other people. Let us sum up. In this unit we learned the differences between genre and literary fiction. We see how many literary fictions were once considered popular and over the period of time become literary through collective appreciation of audience and critics. There are certain factors that differentiate the two types of fiction, However, there is no need to judge either. Here the differences are acknowledged but not seen as judgments.